Hey guys, tonight we're diving into the shadowy underbelly of samurai training, where the line between life and death blurs in ways that would make your modern gym membership feel like a spa day. Did you know that in feudal Japan, aspiring warriors like you often hone their blades on actual human corpses, a practice whispered to have claimed thousands of unwilling teachers from battlefields and execution grounds? Imagine the irony. While today's influencers chase viral sword tricks on TikTok, you're thrust into a world where every swing carries the weight of real mortality, raising questions like, what secrets do the silent dead hold that the living can't mimic? And how far would you go to master an art that demands you stare into the void without flinching? Or perhaps the most chilling one, could the echoes of those final breaths truly forge a blade-sharp soul? Or is it all just a macabre illusion peddled by masters who knew fear was the ultimate sharpener? So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe. Let me know where you're watching from and what time it is where you are. I love seeing how far this sleepy little time machine reaches. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You awaken before the first blush of dawn seeps through the rice paper screens of the dojo, your bare feet pressing against the chilled tatami mats that feel like woven frost under your soles. The air thick with the metallic tang of iron on your teeth from the blade you've been clenching in your sleep. As if your dreams were already rehearsing the horrors to come, the stench hits you first, a cloying, earthy decay that curls into your nostrils like invisible fingers. Not the clean rot of autumn leaves, but something heavier, more intimate, the kind of odour that whispers of bodies left too long in the humid embrace of neglect. And you wonder if this is how the ancients meant to break you, by making the senses your first battlefield. You rise slowly, your muscles protesting with a dull ache from yesterday's endless forms. The cold blade in your hand a simple bokken at first, wooden and unassuming, feeling heavier than it should, its surface slick with the dew that has settled overnight, mirroring the sweat already beading on your forehead despite the pre-dawn chill that seeps through your thin yukata like a lover's betrayal. The dojo looms around you, a cavern of shadows where torchlight from a single flickering lantern dances erratically on the walls, casting elongated figures that twist like tormented spirits, and you grip the blade tighter, the wood biting into your palm with a subtle sting that reminds you this is no game, no polished cater for show, but a ritual rooted in the grim reality of feudal Japan's endless wars, where samurai schools like the one you've pledged to, perhaps the infamous Yagyu, or the shadowy Niiten Ichiryu, demanded apprentices confront death head-on to strip away the illusions of invincibility. Historians still argue whether this corpse training was widespread or exaggerated in later tales, some claiming it was a myth born from Edo period sensationalism, others pointing to unearthed records of battlefield dissections as proof it was as common as rice in a warrior's bowl. But as you step forward, the debate feels irrelevant, swallowed by the immediate sensory assault of that pervasive stench mutating into something sharper, almost acrid, like vinegar mixed with blood. You move toward the center of the room, where a low platform awaits, shrouded in rough hemp cloth that rasps against your fingertips as you pull it back, revealing the first teacher, a corpse procured from who knows where, perhaps a fallen ronin or an executed thief, its skin pallid and cool to the touch, yielding slightly under your probing fingers like overripe fruit. And the shocking element sinks in, this isn't some abstract exercise, but a factual tidbit from history where trainees like you practiced precise cuts on human remains to understand the resistance of flesh and bone, far more unforgiving than straw dummies, a method that saved lives in battle, but scarred souls in the quiet hours. The irony twists in your gut like a bad meal, worse than scrolling through endless doom feeds on your phone back in the modern world, where horror is pixelated and distant. Here it's tactile, the cold seeping from the body into your bones as if transferring its final chill, and you can't help but sarcasm yourself inwardly, thinking how this beats any corporate team-building retreat, where the worst you face is trust falls instead of trust in your blade not to tremble. A physical event unfolds as your master enters silently, his footsteps a soft shuffle on the mats, his eyes gleaming in the torchlight like polished obsidian, and he nods once, gesturing for you to begin. His voice a low rumble that carries the weight of generations, strike true, or let the dead mock you. You raise the bokken, the air humming with tension, and bring it down in a tentative arc, the impact sending a jolt up your arms, a sensory struggle as the wood meets unyielding resistance. Not the clean slice you imagined, but a thud that vibrates through your wrists, pain flaring like hidden embers, and in that moment, a sad whisper creeps in the injustice of it all. How many nameless bodies ended up here, their stories erased, reduced to lessons for the living? A shocking reminder that in this era, life was cheap fodder for the ambitious. Zoom out for a breath, and the dojo seems to expand into the vast tapestry of feudal nights, where stars prick the sky like distant wounds, and the wind outside sighs through bamboo groves, carrying faint cries that might be foxes or forgotten ghosts, widening your perspective to the endless cycle of violence that birthed such practices. But sarcasm bubbles up again. A clever commentary in your mind, at least this beats therapy sessions where you talk about your feelings here. You carve them out instead. The master watches, unblinking, his presence a recurring shadow that will haunt these sessions. And as you prepare for the next strike, the stench intensifies, wrapping around you like a shroud, the iron taste sharpening on your tongue as if the blade itself is bleeding secrets. Another fascinating tidbit slips into your thoughts. Some schools used pickled limbs preserved in salt barrels for repeated use, an absurd economy in death that makes modern recycling look tame. You swing again, the pain in your shoulders building, a psychological chill settling as you meet the corpse's vacant gaze, wondering if its silent scream is echoing in your own chest, shifting your mood from determination to a quiet dread that lingers like fog over a graveyard pond. The torchlight flickers lower, casting grotesque patterns on the body's form, a strange visual image of elongated limbs twisting in eternal repose, leaving you to ponder if this dawn will ever truly break, or if the shadows will swallow you whole before the lesson ends. You hesitate for a split second as the master's command hangs in the air like a noose tightening around your throat. The torchlight now a feeble glow that barely illuminates the pallid form before you, its skin stretched taut over bones that seem to mock your novice grip on the blade, and with icy sweat trickling down your back like rivulets of forgotten rain on a grave marker, you finally summon the will to make the first cut into still flesh. The katana's edge whispering against unyielding skin that resists at first like old leather hardened by time, then gives way with a subtle tear that sends a shiver up your arm, the metallic tang biting sharper on your tongue now, evolving from the iron of anticipation into something more visceral, like the taste of regret mingled with the faint coppery essence seeping from the incision. The dojo's chill deepens around you, the tatami mats beneath your knees damp with condensation that soaks through your yukata like a persistent whisper of injustice, reminding you that this body was once a man, perhaps a condemned thief or a wayward ronin whose final breath was stolen not by battle, but by the cold calculus of feudal law. And as your blade delves deeper, the sensory struggle intensifies, the flesh parting with a soft, wet reluctance that pulls at your muscles, pain flaring in your shoulders from the unaccustomed angle, while the stench mutates into a heavier cloak, now laced with the faint acrid note of exposed innards, wrapping around you like the guilt of desecrating what was once alive. In this moment, a physical event unfolds as the master steps closer, his shadow elongating across the platform like a spectre from the Edo period's grim archives, where such practices were commonplace among sword testers like the Yamada family, professional executioners who honed their craft on corpses to certify a blade's worth, inscribing results on the tang with phrases like 5 bodies severed at the waist, a factual tidbit that folds into your thoughts as you complete the cut, the blade emerging slick and stained. Historians still debating whether these tests were as widespread as legends claim or exaggerated in later scrolls to glorify the samurai code. Some arguing they were rare rituals confined to elite schools, others citing unearthed records from execution grounds as proof of their routine brutality. The shocking element hits you then, the sad realization that this corpse, procured from a battlefield or gallows, embodies the injustice of a system where the poor and defeated became mere tools for the ambitious, their bodies commodified like discarded armor, and you can't help but sarcasm inwardly, thinking how this beats any modern escape room thrill, where the worst you face is fake blood and puzzles instead of the real, clammy resistance of death under your hands. As you withdraw the katana, wiping it on a rag that rasps like dry bones. The iron taste on your tongue intensifies, mutating into a bitter afterglow that coats your mouth, while the torchlight flickers erratically now, casting grotesque patterns that dance like restless spirits across the incised flesh. And in a zoom-out poetic moment, the dojo blurs into the vast expanse of feudal nights, where lanterns dotted distant castles like wary eyes, the wind outside sighing through pines as if mourning the countless unnamed who ended here, widening your perspective to the endless wheel of violence that turned such training into necessity. But clever commentary creeps in, a light sarcasm bubbling up as you glance at the master's impassive face. Here you are, playing anatomical explorer with a sword, worse than a botched DIY project on YouTube where at least the mess is virtual, not this tangible filth that clings to your skin like an unwelcome tattoo of tradition. The master nods subtly, a surprising twist from his earlier stern silence, revealing a flicker of approval in his eyes that you hadn't expected, perhaps recalling his own first cut decades ago when he tested a blade on a stack of criminals' limbs, preserved in salt barrels, an absurd historical tidbit that made reuse economical in those lean times, allowing multiple strikes without fresh procurement, and as he gestures for you to repeat the motion, aiming now for a cleaner diagonal from shoulder to hip, the pain in your wrists sharpens, a sensory echo of the unyielding skin's defiance, forcing you to adjust your stance amid the growing pool of shadows. The injustice lingers like a sad undercurrent, this body reduced to a lesson plan, its story erased in service to your growth, and you wonder if the dead truly impart wisdom or merely haunt the living with their silence. The metallic tang persisting on your tongue as if to affirm that every cut carves not just flesh but a piece of your own humanity away. Another swing follows, the blade singing through the air with a faint whoosh, meeting resistance that jars your elbows, the sweat now a cold sheen that chills you deeper than the dojo's draft. And in this repetition, the master's presence looms larger, his voice a low murmur offering correction on your form, twisting the narrative from mere observer to reluctant mentor who once, in his youth, botched a cut and faced the shame of a dulled edge, a detail that humanizes him amid the horror. Zoom out again, and the scene dissolves into the broader tapestry of samurai lore, where such rites forged warriors from boys. The night sky beyond the screens a canvas of stars indifferent to the filth below, shifting the tone from raw dread to a contemplative hush. Sarcasm strikes once more, a wry thought comparing this to binge-watching true crime docs from your cozy bed, where the gore is sanitized and distant, not this intimate dance with decay that leaves your hands trembling slightly, the iron motif evolving into a full-bodied flavor that nauseates faintly. The cut completes, cleaner this time, the flesh yielding with less protest, but the shocking sadness swells as you notice a faint scar on the corpse's arm, a remnant of a life lived before this ignoble end. Perhaps a farmer's mark from toiling fields now forgotten in the name of your training. Historians argue over the ethics of these practices, some claiming they were exaggerated in folklore to deter commoners from challenging samurai authority, others insisting on the grim reality backed by execution logs from the Tokugawa shogunate. But as you step back, the debate fades into the immediate ache in your fingers, the wet wool of your yukata dampened now by sweat and splatter, clinging uncomfortably like a second skin of remorse. The master circles the platform, inspecting your work with a critical eye, his earlier approval twisting into a stern reminder of precision, and as the torchlight steadies momentarily, illuminating the precise line of your incision, a psychological chill settles in your core, the realization that this is merely the beginning, the flesh's unyielding nature a harbinger of harder trials ahead. The stench thickens, mutating into a pervasive fog that blurs the edges of the room, the iron tang on your tongue now a constant companion, biting like the weight of inherited sins, leaving you with a mood shift from hesitant resolve to a quiet, creeping determination laced with dread, as the first hints of dawn tease the horizon outside, promising no relief from the shadows within. A strange visual image lingers in your mind's eye, the incised flesh resembling a cracked parchment map of forgotten paths, veins like rivers dried in death, pulling you deeper into the night's embrace with a question unspoken. How many more cuts before the blade feels like an extension of your own regretful soul? You stumble over the slick, muddied grounds outside the dojo, the dawn barely breaking through a heavy mist that clings to your skin like the damp breath of the dead. the air thick with the stench of decay now sharpened by wet earth and the faint musk of rotting straw. A sensory assault that makes your stomach churn as if you've swallowed a mouthful of the iron tang still lingering on your tongue, now mutated into something sourer, like the aftertaste of fear itself. Your feet, bare and calloused, slip slightly on the uneven terrain, each step sending a jolt of cold pain through your soles as you navigate the training yard littered with remnants, broken bamboo shafts, scattered pebbles, and, in the dim light, what might be bones half buried in the muck, their pale glint catching the flicker of a distant torch like accusations from forgotten graves, whispering of injustices etched into the soil of feudal Japan, where the fallen were often left as fodder for warriors like you to sharpen their blades and spirits. The torchlight, your recurring guide, casts long, wavering shadows that twist across the ground like the echoes of warriors long gone, their silent screams woven into the wind that cuts through your thin yukata, chilling you deeper than the morning frost, a sensory struggle that bites at your exposed skin and makes your fingers tremble around the katana's hilt. Still slick from last night's grim work, a physical event unfolds as you're summoned to the yard's centre, where a line of straw mats lies arranged in a grim row, each concealing a form that you know isn't straw but flesh, procured from battlefields or execution grounds, their stories erased to serve your training, a practice rooted in the Sengoku era's brutal pragmatism, where schools like the Itoryu reportedly tested blades on the condemned to perfect the art of killing. A historical tidbit that lands in your mind like a stone in a still pond, rippling with the shocking sadness that these were men with lives, not just tools for your growth. Historians debate whether such practices were as common as scrolls suggest, or inflated by later chroniclers to romanticize the samurai's ruthless edge, some citing Tokugawa records of executioners using corpses for blade tests, others arguing it was a rare rite reserved for elite disciples. But as you kneel beside the first mat, the debate feels as distant as a modern TED Talk, irrelevant against the immediate weight of the cold, clammy surface beneath your fingers, the injustice of it all sinking into your bones like the mud soaking your knees. Sarcasm bubbles up, a wry thought comparing this to signing up for a CrossFit class only to find the equipment is human remains way worse than any kettlebell circuit gone wrong, and you almost smirk. But the master's shadow looms nearby, his presence a recurring spectre from the dojo's inner sanctum, now watching with eyes that seem to pierce through your bravado, his earlier approval twisted into a silent challenge to prove your resolve. You pull back the mat, revealing another corpse, its face frozen in a rictus that makes your breath catch, the eyes half open as if still pleading for mercy, and the physical act of raising your blade feels heavier now, not just from the ache in your arms but from the moral weight of slicing into what was once a person, perhaps a peasant caught in a lord's petty feud, a reminder of the era's cruel hierarchy where the powerless fueled the powerful's ascent. The iron tang on your tongue sharpens, now laced with the bitter edge of guilt, mutating into a taste that coats your throat like ash, while the torchlight flickers wildly, casting grotesque silhouettes that dance across the corpse's form, amplifying the horror of your task. Zoom out, and the training yard dissolves into the broader tapestry of feudal Japan, where battlefields stretched like open wounds across the land, the cries of the fallen carried on winds that rustled through distant pines, a poetic shift that widens your perspective to the endless cycle of violence that birthed such rites, making your small act feel both insignificant and monstrous. A fascinating tidbit surfaces in your thoughts. Some samurai schools used straw-wrapped corpses to simulate live combat, an absurd workaround to preserve bodies for repeated cuts, like a morbid version of reusing plastic bags. And the thought almost makes you laugh, a clever commentary on how even death was economized in this brutal world. Not unlike today's gig economy, where everything is optimized for efficiency, even at the cost of humanity. The master's voice cuts through the mist, low and gravelly, urging you to strike with precision, his own past flashing briefly in his tone a rumour that he once trained under a master who demanded cuts, so clean they left no blood. A twist on his stoic presence that makes you wonder what horrors he endured to stand here now, unyielding. You swing the katana, the blade meeting flesh with a dull thud that sends pain shooting through your wrists, the resistance tougher than last night's cut, as if the body itself resists your intrusion, and the shocking sadness deepens. The realization that each stroke erases a fragment of someone's existence, their dreams reduced to a lesson in anatomy. The wet wool of your yukata clings tighter now, heavy with mud and morning dew, a sensory struggle that mirrors the weight on your conscience, and as you complete the cut, the torchlight steadies momentarily, illuminating the precise line of your incision against the pale flesh, a strange visual image like a calligrapher's stroke gone wrong, jagged and raw. The master nods, but his eyes narrow, hinting at trials yet to come, and the injustice of this practice using the dead to train the living settles in your chest like a stone, a psychological chill that makes you question whether mastery is worth this cost, or if the echoes of these silent warriors will haunt your blade forever. The mist thickens, shrouding the yard in a ghostly veil, the iron tang now a persistent burn in your mouth, and as you step back, the ground feels unsteady beneath you, leaving you with a mood shift from grim determination to a creeping unease, wondering if the next mat hides not just another body but a mirror of your own fraying soul. You feel the master's unyielding gaze boring into your back like a heated brand as you raise the katana once more over the limp form on the mat, the chill wind slipping through cracks in the dojo's outer walls to carry whispers of injustice that pierce deeper than any wound you've inflicted so far, rustling the edges of the straw coverings and stirring the mist into swirling eddies that brush your face with icy fingers. The air now laced with a sharper bite that makes your eyes water and your breath come in shallow huffs, your arms, already aching from the dawn's relentless repetitions, burn with a fire that spreads from your shoulders down to your fingertips, each muscle protesting as you force the blade upward, the weight of it pulling at your sinews like chains forged from your own doubts. And the sensory struggle intensifies as the wet wool of your yukata, now heavy with mud from the yard, and sweat from your exertion clings to your skin like a shroud soaked in regret, chafing against raw spots where the fabric has rubbed you raw, mutating the familiar dampness into a prickling irritation that mirrors the growing frustration in your chest. A physical event erupts as the master steps forward, his hand clamping down on your wrist mid-swing to correct your angle, his grip iron-hard and unyielding, twisting your arm slightly to demonstrate the precise arc needed for a clean severance, his voice a gravelly murmur that cuts through the wind, again, until the blade sings without hesitation, forcing you to repeat the strike on the limp form below, the katana descending with a whoosh that meets flesh in a jarring thud, pain exploding in your elbows as the resistance fights back, not yielding easily, but dragging out the motion until your breath rasps like sandpaper in your throat. The torchlight, flickering from a bracket on the wall, casts erratic shadows that elongate the corpse's features into grotesque masks, mutating from the steady glow of earlier sessions into a dancing frenzy that seems to mock your fatigue, while the iron tang on your tongue evolves into a metallic burn that sears your palate, now infused with the salty bite of your own sweat dripping from your brow. In this grueling repetition, a factual moment of history folds in as you recall tales of the Yoshioka school in Kyoto, where masters like Seijuro demanded apprentices practice on executed criminals to master the art of the single strike, a method that ensured blades were tested for lethality before duels. Historians still arguing whether this was a widespread tradition across Ryō, or confined to urban centers like Edo, some claiming it built unparalleled precision, others debating if it was a psychological tool to desensitize young warriors to death's intimacy. The shocking element surges as you realize the limp form beneath your blade might have been a simple farmer accused of tax evasion, his life snuffed out to serve this endless drill, a sad injustice that twists in your gut like a knife. The system devouring the weak to forge the strong, and sarcasm creeps in with a bitter edge, thinking how this beats any corporate grind where overtime just means emails at midnight instead of carving through the night on borrowed flesh. Zoom out, and the yard blurs into the vast feudal landscape, where castle walls loomed like silent judges over fields scarred by endless skirmishes, the wind carrying not just whispers, but the distant clamour of forges hammering out more blades for more bodies, shifting the tone from personal agony to a contemplative sorrow for the era's forgotten souls. A fascinating tidbit bubbles up amid the pain some masters used bamboo-wrapped corpses to simulate armoured foes, an absurd innovation that added layers of resistance without wasting fresh material, like a medieval hack for budget training. And the thought almost draws a wry chuckle from you. a clever commentary on how even in horror, efficiency ruled, not unlike today's meal prep kits that promise convenience amid chaos. The master's grip releases, but his gaze remains, revisiting his presence from the dojo's inner shadows with a surprising twist. He pauses to share a fragment of his past, murmuring that as a youth, he once faltered on a similar drill, slicing too shallow and earning a scar from his own master's corrective lash. A revelation that humanizes his stoic facade, turning the symbol of unyielding authority into a scarred survivor who knows the fire in your arms all too well. You strike again, the blade descending with renewed force, the burn in your muscles flaring into white-hot agony that makes your vision blur, the chill wind whipping harder now to sting your eyes and carry away flecks of debris from the mat, while the wet wool chafes relentlessly, a constant reminder of your vulnerability amid this ritual. Sarcasm strikes once more, a light jab in your mind comparing this to scrolling doom on social media, where endless swipes numb you to horror without the physical toll. But here every repetition etches the injustice deeper, the limp form's pallor a silent testament to lives discarded like yesterday's rice husks. The torchlight steadies briefly, illuminating the clean line of your latest cut, but the shadows twist anew, mutating into shapes that resemble grasping hands reaching from the ground. Zoom out further, and the scene expands to encompass the whispering winds that sweep across provinces, linking your yard to distant execution sites where heads roll to feed such practices, a poetic widening that infuses the air with the melancholy of cycles unbroken. Historians ponder if these drills truly honed mastery or merely bred numbness, some pointing to survivor accounts from the Meiji era as evidence of psychological scars, others insisting the discipline forged unbreakable wills. But as your arms tremble on the upswing, the debate dissolves into the immediate fire searing your biceps, the injustice of repeating strikes on the voiceless fueling a quiet rage. The master circles you now, his footsteps crunching softly on the muddied ground, his gaze unblinking as he adjusts your stance with a firm push to your shoulder, the contact sending fresh pain radiating down your spine. And in this moment, the shocking sadness deepens, imagining the limp form's family somewhere in a distant village, unaware their loved one serves as your unwilling mentor. A modern comparison flits through your thoughts, likening this to grinding levels in a video game marathon, where fatigue builds without real stakes. Yet here the stakes are etched in flesh and fire. The burn in your arms a testament to the era's unforgiving forge. The wind picks up, carrying a faint, eerie moan that might be branches creaking or something more spectral. The iron tang burning fiercer on your tongue as sweat mixes with it, creating a nauseating brew. You complete another strike, the blade biting deep this time, the resistance giving way with a soft yield that jars less but exhausts more. Your breaths coming in ragged gasps amid the chill that now feels like needles pricking your skin. The master's approval is absent, his gaze twisting into one of quiet assessment, revealing another layer to his story. He admits in a hushed tone that his own master forced him through a night-long vigil once, cutting until dawn broke. A twist that bonds you in shared suffering, turning the dojo symbol of authority into a chain linking generations of pain. The wet wool weighs heavier, sodden and cold, a sensory anchor pulling you down as fatigue creeps in like unseen fog. Sarcasm whispers again, a clever quip in your head about how this would make for a killer fitness app. Corpse cuts build strength through the ages, but the humor fades against the growing ache, the injustice of the limp forms piercing your resolve like the wind's chill. As the repetitions blur into one endless motion, the torchlight dims slightly, casting the yard in a hazy glow where shadows merge with mist. A strange visual image of elongated figures that seem to rise from the mats like accusations unspoken, leaving you with a psychological chill that settles in your marrow, wondering if the fire in your arms will ever quench, or if it will consume you before the master's gaze relents, shifting your mood from defiant endurance to a weary resignation laced with quiet terror. You kneel in the damp darkness of the dojo's outer annex, the nighttime vigil stretching endless before you, as the flickering torchlight cast ghostly patterns across the pallid faces of the corpses lined against the wall, their vacant eyes glinting like polished stones under the wavering flame. And the stench of decay now weaves through the humid air, mutating into a suffocating fog that clings to your throat. intensifying the iron tang on your tongue into a rancid burn that tastes like despair laced with old blood, while the wet wool of your yukata, sodden from the yard's mud and your own relentless sweat, wraps around you like a shroud of guilt, chilling your skin with a clammy grip that makes every movement a sensory struggle. The fabric chafing raw patches on your shoulders until they sting like whispered accusations. The cold seeps into your bones, a deep ache that mirrors the throbbing in your overworked arms, each pulse a reminder of the countless cuts you've made, and as you adjust your grip on the katana, the hilt slick with condensation, a physical event unfolds as the master commands you to begin a new ritual. His voice a low rasp slicing through the silence. Trace their wounds, learn their silence, directing you to carve precise lines along the scars of the dead, a task that forces you to lean closer to the corpses, their waxy flesh cool against your trembling fingertips, the act sending a jolt of pain through your wrists as you struggle to maintain control under his unyielding gaze. Now, a recurring shadow from the dawn's drills, his eyes reflecting the torchlight like twin voids that seem to pull at your resolve. The air grows heavier, the humidity pressing against your chest like a living thing, and the shocking sadness washes over you as you trace a jagged scar on the nearest body, perhaps from a blade that ended its life in a petty skirmish, a life reduced to this silent lesson in a world where samurai honor justified such grim practices, a historical tidbit surfacing in your mind about the Tokugawa shogunate's execution grounds, where bodies were often donated to sword schools for night-long training sessions. Historians debating whether this was a practical necessity to hone lethal precision or a psychological tactic to strip young warriors of empathy. Some citing scrolls that detailed thousands of such donations annually, others arguing it was a myth to deter rebellion. Sarcasm bubbles up, a wry thought comparing this to a late-night study session gone wrong, where instead of cramming for exams, you're cramming blades into flesh, worse than any all-nighter fueled by energy drinks and desperation, and the irony twists deeper as you realize this is no game. The cold flesh under your blade, a testament to the era's brutal economy of death. Zoom out, and the annex blurs into the vast night of feudal Japan, where lanterns flickered in distant villages like fireflies trapped in a web of violence. The wind outside moaning through bamboo groves as if echoing the voiceless pleas of those who ended here, a poetic shift that widens your perspective to the relentless cycle of sacrifice that fueled the samurai's rise. The master's presence looms, his earlier admission of surviving his own brutal training twisting into a new revelation as he whispers that these vigils were his crucible, where he once spent a full moon carving until his hands bled, a surprising detail that binds you to him in shared suffering, turning his stoic silhouette into a scarred mentor who knows the weight of each cut you make. You press the katana along a faded scar, the blade catching slightly on toughened tissue, the resistance sending fresh pain radiating through your forearms, and the sensory struggle deepens as the humidity makes your grip falter. The wet wool now a second skin that drags at your movements, amplifying the injustice of this task, each body a story erased. Perhaps a merchant or a farmer caught in a lord's feud, their lives snuffed out to serve your ascent. A fascinating tidbit creeps into your thoughts. Some schools soaked corpses in brine to preserve them for weeks, an absurd practice that ensured a steady supply of training material like a morbid subscription service. And the thought sparks a grim chuckle, a clever commentary on how even death was streamlined for efficiency, not unlike today's meal kit deliveries that promise convenience at a cost. The torchlight flickers lower, casting grotesque shadows that seem to writhe across the corpses' faces, mutating the pallid forms into distorted masks that haunt your peripheral vision, while the iron tang burns fiercer, now tinged with the sourness of your own exhaustion, a taste that coats your mouth like a warning. You complete the cut, the blade gliding smoother this time, but the act feels more invasive, the silence of the dead pressing against you like a physical force. And the shocking sadness swells as you notice a faint tattoo on the corpse's arm, a crude fish etched in faded ink, a relic of a life lived by rivers now forgotten, its presence a quiet accusation of the system's cruelty. Zoom out again, and the annex expands into the broader tapestry of the era where night cloaked the land in secrets, the distant howl of a wolf blending with the wind's lament, shifting the tone from visceral dread to a contemplative melancholy. Sarcasm strikes once more, a light jab in your mind likening this to a horror movie marathon where the scares are real, not jump cuts on a screen. and the master's voice interrupts, correcting your angle with a sharp word, his gaze unyielding as he circles you, his earlier vulnerability now buried beneath a mask of authority, a twist that makes you question if his empathy was fleeting or a calculated spur to push you harder. The wet wool chafes relentlessly, the cold now a deep ache that settles in your joints, and as you move to the next corpse, the torchlight dims further, plunging the annex into near darkness where shadows merge with the mist outside. A strange visual image of faces that seem to flicker between life and death, their eyes glinting as if watching you back. Historians argue over the psychological toll of these vigils, some claiming they forged unbreakable warriors, others pointing to accounts of trainees driven to madness by the relentless proximity to death. But as your blade traces another scar, the debate fades into the immediate sting in your hands, the injustice of these nameless bodies fueling a quiet rage that battles the exhaustion creeping in. The master pauses, his shadow stretching long across the wall, and in a hushed tone, he admits that his own vigils left him sleepless for weeks, haunted by faces he could never unsee. A revelation that deepens the bond of shared horror, turning the annex into a crucible where both master and student are forged by the same fire. The iron tang persists, now a constant burn that nauseates faintly, while the humidity wraps tighter, making each breath a labour. And as you complete another cut, the silence grows heavier, a psychological chill settling in your core as you wonder if these faces will follow you into sleep, their silent screams echoing in your dreams. The torchlight sputters, casting the room in a fleeting glow that reveals the tattooed fish once more, its outline stark against the pallid flesh. A haunting image that lingers like a question unanswered. Will these vigils sharpen your blade or dull your soul, leaving you to carry the weight of their silence into the next night's trial? You step into the training yard under a sky bruised with clouds, the dawn's faint light barely piercing the heavy air that carries the stench of decay, now laced with the sharp, acrid bite of sweat-soaked bodies, both living and dead. The iron tang on your tongue mutating into a gritty, metallic grit that grinds against your teeth like sand from a battlefield's edge, while the wet wool of your yukata, still sodden from last night's vigils, clings to your skin with a clammy insistence, chafing raw patches into fiery welts that sting with every shift of your shoulders. A sensory struggle that makes each movement feel like dragging a boulder through mud. The yard hums with reluctant energy as you face your first living opponents. A line of fellow apprentices whose eyes dart nervously, their hands trembling on their bokken as they brace for the clash, their breaths visible in the chill morning mist. And the physical event unfolds as the master barks an order to begin, his voice a whip crack that slices through the tension, forcing you to square off against a wiry youth named Kenji, his stance shaky but his gaze defiant, the first strike landing with a crack against your forearm that sends a jolt of pain radiating through your bones. Sharp and immediate, like a lightning bolt grounded in your flesh, the torchlight, now mounted on wooden stakes around the yard, flickers erratically, casting grotesque shadows that twist across the ground, mutating from the ghostly patterns of the annex into jagged shapes that mimic clashing swords, while the cold bites deeper, seeping through the damp fabric to numb your fingers, making your grip on the bokken falter as you parry Kenji's desperate counterattack, the impact jarring your wrists with a dull fire that threatens to unravel your focus. A factual moment of history slips into your thoughts amid the chaos, recalling how samurai schools like the Shinkaja Ryu used live sparring to simulate the unpredictability of real combat, often pitting novices against each other to weed out weakness. Historians debating whether these brutal sessions built resilience or merely broke spirits, some citing records of apprentices crippled in training, others arguing the practice forged warriors who could face death without flinching. The shocking sadness hits as you notice Kenji's flinch, his eyes betraying fear not just of your blade but of the master's judgment. A boy no older than you caught in the same cruel system that demands perfection or disgrace. An injustice that stings sharper than the bruise blooming on your arm, the era's hierarchy turning comrades into reluctant foes. Sarcasm creeps in, a wry thought comparing this to a modern reality show where contestants stab each other for clout. Except here, the prize is survival, not a cash payout. And the irony twists as you realize this yard is less a training ground than a crucible, where bonds are forged or shattered under pressure. Zoom out, and the yard expands into the broader tapestry of feudal Japan, where dawn broke over countless dojos like this one, the clash of wooden swords echoing like war drums across provinces, the wind carrying the faint cries of those who fell, a poetic shift that widens your perspective to the relentless cycle of violence that shapes such rituals. A fascinating tidbit surfaces: some schools used padded armor made from layered cotton stuffed with horsehair, an absurd makeshift solution to lessen injuries without dulling the stakes, like a medieval version of bubble wrap, and the thought sparks a grim chuckle, a clever commentary on how even safety was a luxury in this brutal world, not unlike today's gig workers dodging risks for minimal gain. The master's presence looms again, his gaze revisiting the yard from the annex's shadows, now twisted with a surprising intensity as he steps forward to correct Kenji's form with a sharp rap of his own bokken, revealing a flicker of frustration that hints at his own past failures in similar drills, a humanizing detail that makes you wonder what scars he carries from his own reluctant clashes. You strike again, aiming for Kenji's shoulder, the bokken connecting with a thud that sends pain shooting through your elbow, the sensory struggle deepening as the wet wool chafes relentlessly, the cold now a piercing ache that settles in your joints, while the stench of sweat and decay mingles, wrapping you in a fog of shared fear that makes every breath feel like swallowing ash. The torchlight flares briefly, illuminating Kenji's grimace as he stumbles back, his bokken raised in defense, but his movements are slow, betraying exhaustion that mirrors your own, and the shocking sadness deepens as you realize this fight isn't just about skill, but survival. The system pitting you against a friend to prove your worth, erasing camaraderie in the name of mastery. Zoom out again, and the scene blurs into the vast dawn of the era, where samurai trained under skies heavy with the promise of bloodshed. The distant clang of forges crafting blades for endless wars, shifting the tone from visceral pain to a contemplative sorrow for the bonds broken in this yard. Sarcasm strikes once more, a light jab in your mind likening this to a toxic workplace where colleagues sabotage each other for a promotion. But here the stakes are etched in bruises and fear, not office politics. The master circles, his footsteps crunching on the gravel, his earlier frustration twisting into a quiet command to continue, his voice betraying a weariness that suggests he, too, once faced a friend in this yard, a twist that deepens the bond of shared suffering, turning the symbol of authority into a fellow survivor of the system's cruelty. You parry another strike, the impact sending a fresh wave of pain through your forearm, the wet wool now a sodden weight that drags at your movements. And as Kenji lunges again, his bokken grazing your ribs with a sting that burns like betrayal, the iron tang on your tongue intensifies, now a gritty mix of sweat and dread that coats your mouth like a warning of battles to come. Historians argue over the psychological toll of these life spars, some claiming they built unbreakable camaraderie through shared hardship, others pointing to accounts of apprentices driven to distrust by constant competition. But as you lock eyes with Kenji, his fear mirroring your own, the debate fades into the immediate ache in your ribs, the injustice of fighting a friend fueling a quiet rage that battles the cold seeping into your bones. The torchlight dims, casting the yard in a hazy glow where shadows merge with the mist, a strange visual image of clashing figures that seem to flicker between ally and enemy, their outlines blurring like ghosts of past spars. The stench thickens, the acrid bite of sweat now overpowering the decay, and as you step back, panting, the master's gaze narrows, his silence a challenge to push through the pain, leaving you with a mood shift from defiant resolve to a creeping dread, wondering if the next strike will break Kenji's spirit or your own, the yard's shadows stretching long and thin like fingers reaching for your soul, pulling you deeper into the crucible where loyalty and survival clash under the weight of an unforgiving dawn. You stand beneath a moonlit sky, the air heavy with the oppressive humidity of a summer night, the dampness soaking into your yukata until it clings like a second skin, its wet wool now a suffocating weight that chafes raw welts into your shoulders, amplifying the sensory struggle as the iron tang on your tongue mutates into a bitter, acrid burn, laced with the sourness of your own exhaustion and the faint, sickly sweet decay wafting from the training yard, where the ground is still slick with mud and the ghosts of yesterday's drills. the stench wrapping around you like a shroud of guilt that makes every breath feel like swallowing a memory you'd rather forget. The moon casts a pale, silvery glow, its light fractured through the bamboo grove, creating jagged shadows that dance across the straw mats where you kneel. The torchlight from earlier sessions now absent, leaving only the cold lunar gleam to illuminate the corpses arranged in a silent circle, their pallid forms seeming to pulse faintly in the night, as if the dead themselves are watching your forbidden ritual unfold. A physical event grips you as the master, his silhouette a recurring spectre from the dawn's clashes, steps forward with a bamboo rod, his voice a low hiss commanding you to trace sacred patterns on the cooling bodies, a ritual meant to honor the spirits while sharpening your precision. Your katana trembling in your hands as you carve delicate lines across a corpse's chest, the blade catching on toughened skin that sends pain flaring through your wrists, each stroke a delicate dance between reverence and desecration, the humidity making your grip slip as sweat beads on your brow, stinging your eyes like silent accusations. The shocking sadness washes over you, the realization that this body, perhaps a disgraced samurai or a peasant caught in a lord's wrath, lies here not by choice, but by the cruel mechanics of a system that values your skill over their humanity, an injustice that coils in your gut like a serpent, tightening with each cut. A factual moment of history seeps into your thoughts, recalling how some samurai schools, like the secretive Onoha Ito-ryu, incorporated Shinto-inspired rituals into their training, using corpses to practice cuts believed to channel spiritual energy. Historians debating whether these acts were truly sacred or a grim justification for exploiting the dead, some pointing to temple records of offerings made to appease restless spirits, others arguing it was a psychological tool to bind warriors to their duty through fear of divine retribution. Sarcasm bubbles up, a wry thought comparing this to a modern yoga retreat gone horribly wrong, where instead of chanting for inner peace, you're carving prayers into flesh, worse than any mindfulness app promising clarity through chaos. And the irony twists as you realize this ritual is less about honoring the dead and more about breaking you into submission. Zoom out, and the yard dissolves into the vast tapestry of feudal nights, where moonlight bathed countless dojos in an eerie glow, the distant wail of a flute mingling with the wind's sigh through pines, a poetic shift that widens your perspective to the era's obsession with blending death and divinity, turning warriors into instruments of both. A fascinating tidbit surfaces: some schools used rice wine to anoint corpses before such rituals, an absurd practice meant to purify the act, like splashing perfume on decay. And the thought sparks a grim chuckle, a clever commentary on how even spirituality was co-opted for efficiency. Not unlike today's wellness influencers peddling sage smudges for profit, the master's presence looms larger, his earlier vulnerability twisting into a stern command as he adjusts your blade's angle with the rod, revealing a surprising detail: he once performed this ritual under a blood-red moon, his hands shaking so badly he scarred a body beyond recognition, a confession that paints him as a man forged by the same horrors now testing you, turning the symbol of authority into a mirror of your own trembling resolve. You trace another line, the katana gliding smoother now but still catching on a knot of muscle, the pain in your wrists a constant fire that blends with the humidity's oppressive weight, the wet wool chafing relentlessly as if punishing you for daring to disturb the dead. The moonlight shifts, casting grotesque shadows that seem to writhe across the corpses' faces, mutating into fleeting expressions of anguish that make your breath catch, while the iron tang burns fiercer, now tinged with the faint sweetness of rice wine lingering in the air, a sensory echo of the ritual's strange sanctity. The shocking sadness deepens as you notice a crude prayer bead clutched in the corpse's hand, its wood worn smooth by desperate fingers in life, a relic of faith now discarded like the body itself, a testament to the era's brutal indifference to the powerless. Zoom out again, and the scene expands to encompass the silent provinces where such rituals were whispered secrets, the moonlight a cold witness to acts that blurred the line between reverence and blasphemy, shifting the tone from visceral dread to a contemplative melancholy. Sarcasm strikes once more, a light jab likening this to a late-night art class where the canvas fights back, but here the stakes are etched in flesh and spirit, not charcoal and paper. The master circles, his rod tapping the ground rhythmically, his earlier confession twisting into a quiet warning that the spirits watch those who falter, a twist that makes you question if his stoicism masks fear of the same ghosts haunting you now. The humidity presses tighter, making each breath a labor, the wet wool a sodden cage that drags at your movements, and as you carve another line, the blade trembles slightly, the pain in your hands now a throbbing pulse that mirrors your heartbeat. Historians argue over the spiritual toll of these rituals, some claiming they instilled a sacred discipline, others pointing to accounts of warriors plagued by nightmares of vengeful spirits. But as your katana traces the final pattern, the debate fades into the immediate sting in your fingers, the injustice of this act fueling a quiet rage that battles the exhaustion creeping in like the night's fog. The moonlight dims, clouded over briefly, casting the yard in near darkness where shadows merge with the mist. A strange visual image of prayer beads glinting like stars fallen to earth, their faint glow a haunting reminder of lives reduced to tools. The iron tang persists, now a sickly sweet burn that nauseates faintly, while the humidity wraps you tighter, making the air feel like a living thing pressing against your chest. The master pauses, his shadow stretching long across the mats, and in a hushed tone, he admits that his own rituals left him seeing faces in every shadow for years, a revelation that deepens the bond of shared horror, turning the yard into a crucible where both master and student are tested by the same divine dread. The stench of decay thickens, mingling with the rice wine's sweetness, and as you complete the final cut, the silence grows heavier, a psychological chill settling in your core as you wonder if these spirits will follow you into sleep, their whispered curses echoing in the moonlight's fade. The yard lies still, the prayer beads glinting faintly like eyes in the dark, a haunting image that lingers like a question unanswered. Will these rituals forge your soul into steel or bind you to the ghosts you've carved, pulling you deeper into a night where the boundary between sacred and profane dissolves under the weight of a silent, accusing sky? You stagger into the training yard as the dawn breaks with a sickly pallor, the air thick with the stench of decay now sharpened by the sour tang of betrayal, the iron taste on your tongue mutating into a gritty, metallic sludge that coats your mouth like the residue of broken trust, while the wet wool of your yukata, sodden with last night's humidity and streaked with mud from endless falls, clings to your skin with a punishing grip, chafing raw welts into your shoulders that burn with every breath. A sensory struggle that feels like wearing a cage woven from your own exhaustion. The yard, churned into a quagmire by relentless drills, sucks at your bare feet, each step a cold, squelching jolt that sends pain shooting through your ankles, and the flickering torchlight, now a dim pulse on the wooden stakes, casts grotesque shadows that twist across the ground, mutating from the moonlit patterns of the ritual into jagged shapes that seem to claw at the air, as if the yard itself is alive with the echoes of treachery. A physical event erupts as Kenji, your sparring partner from the dawn's clashes, steps forward with a bokken raised not in practice but in malice. His eyes once wide with shared fear now narrowed with a cold resolve that chills you deeper than the morning's damp, his strike coming fast and unannounced, grazing your ribs with a crack that sends a white-hot flare of pain through your side, a betrayal that stings sharper than the bruise blooming beneath your skin, revealing the yard as a crucible where allies turn foes under the master's unrelenting pressure. The shocking sadness sinks in, the realization that Kenji, a boy you shared rice with under starlit skies, has been pushed by the system's cruelty to see you as a rival to crush, an injustice that coils in your gut like a poisoned root, the era's hierarchy turning comrades into enemies to prove their worth. A factual moment of history folds into your thoughts, recalling how samurai schools like the Yagyu Shinkage Ryu often fostered rivalries among students to sharpen their instincts, a practice rooted in the Sengoku period's brutal survivalism. Historians debating whether this bred loyalty to the school or sowed seeds of distrust that fractured dojos, some citing records of duels sparked by such betrayals, others arguing it was a calculated tactic to mimic the chaos of real battlefields. Sarcasm creeps in, a wry thought likening this to a corporate team-building exercise where colleagues stab each other in the back for a corner office, except here the stakes are etched in bruises and broken bonds. Worse than any reality show drama where betrayal is scripted for views, zoom out, and the yard blurs into the vast tapestry of feudal Japan, where dawn broke over countless dojos like this one, the clash of bokken echoing like the heartbeat of a land scarred by endless feuds, the wind carrying the faint wail of those who fell to ambition. A poetic shift that widens your perspective to the relentless cycle of loyalty and betrayal that shaped the samurai's world. A fascinating tidbit surfaces: some schools used weighted bokken filled with sand to simulate the heft of real blades, an absurd innovation that made training injuries more brutal, like a medieval version of swinging kettlebells with spikes, and the thought sparks a grim chuckle, a clever commentary on how even pain was engineered for efficiency. Not unlike today's fitness fads that promise transformation through suffering, the master's presence looms, his gaze revisiting the yard from the moonlit ritual, now twisted with a surprising intensity as he watches Kenji strike without intervening, revealing a flicker of approval that hints at his own past betrayals in this very yard, a detail that paints him as a man forged by the same treachery now testing you, turning the symbol of authority into a silent orchestrator of this cruel game. You parry Kenji's next blow, the bokken's impact sending a fresh wave of pain through your forearm, the wet wool chafing relentlessly as the cold seeps deeper, numbing your fingers until your grip feels like clutching a ghost, while the stench of sweat and decay thickens, wrapping you in a fog of shared desperation that makes every breath feel like inhaling ash. The torchlight flares briefly, illuminating Kenji's grimace as he lunges again, his bokken aiming for your shoulder, but his movements betray a hesitation born of guilt, and the shocking sadness deepens as you realize this betrayal isn't personal, but a product of the system, forcing you both to fight for scraps of the master's favor, erasing the camaraderie you once shared over stolen moments of laughter. Zoom out again, and the scene expands to encompass the broader dawn of the era, where samurai trained under skies heavy with the promise of bloodshed, the distant clang of forges crafting blades for endless wars, shifting the tone from visceral pain to a contemplative sorrow for the bonds shattered in this yard. Sarcasm strikes once more, a light jab likening this to a toxic social media feud where friends unfollow each other for clout. But here the stakes are etched in flesh and fear, not likes and retweets. The master steps closer, his footsteps crunching on the gravel, his earlier approval twisting into a quiet command to continue, his voice betraying a weariness that suggests he, too, once betrayed a friend in this yard, a twist that deepens the bond of shared suffering, turning the yard into a crucible where trust is burned away to forge sharper blades. You strike back, aiming for Kenji's thigh, the bokken connecting with a thud that sends pain radiating through your elbow, the sensory struggle deepening as the wet wool drags at your movements, the cold now a piercing ache that settles in your joints, while the iron tang intensifies, now a gritty mix of sweat and betrayal that coats your mouth like a warning of battles to come. Historians argue over the long-term effects of these rivalries, some claiming they built unbreakable warriors through competition, others pointing to accounts of dojos torn apart by internal strife. But as you lock eyes with Kenji, his guilt mirroring your own, the debate fades into the immediate sting in your ribs, the injustice of fighting a friend fueling a quiet rage that battles the exhaustion creeping in like the dawn's mist. The torchlight dims, casting the yard in a hazy glow where shadows merge with the muck. A strange visual image of clashing figures that seem to flicker between ally and enemy, their outlines blurring like ghosts of past betrayals. The stench thickens, the sour bite of sweat now overpowering the decay. And as you step back, panting, the master's gaze narrows, his silence a challenge to push through the pain, leaving you with a mood shift from defiant resolve to a creeping dread, wondering if the next strike will break Kenji's spirit or your own. The yard's shadows stretching long and thin like fingers reaching for your soul, pulling you deeper into a crucible where loyalty is a luxury you can no longer afford, and the dawn's pale light offers no promise of redemption, only the cold certainty of more betrayals to come. You collapse onto your knees in the training yard, the ground a churned mess of mud and straw that sucks at your skin with a cold, greedy pull, the air thick with the stench of decay now laced with the sour reek of your own sweat, the iron tang on your tongue mutating into a gritty, metallic sludge that grinds against your teeth like the residue of endless failure, while the wet wool of your yukata, sodden with days of grime and damp, clings to your body like a punishment, Chafing raw welts into your shoulders until they scream with every breath. A sensory struggle that makes each movement feel like dragging your soul through a mire of exhaustion. The torchlight, flickering weakly on the stakes, casts grotesque shadows that twist across the ground, mutating from the jagged shapes of betrayal into a chaotic dance that mirrors the frenzy in your muscles, each one burning with a fire that threatens to consume you, and as you grip the bokken, its surface slick with mud and sweat. A physical event unfolds as the master orders another round of exhaustive drills, his voice a relentless drone that cuts through the dawn's haze. Strike until your body forgets pain, forcing you to rise and face a straw dummy lashed to a post. Its form eerily human in the dim light, the first swing sending a jolt of agony through your arms as the wood connects with a dull thud, the impact reverberating through your bones like a hammer on an anvil. The cold bites deeper, numbing your fingers until they feel like brittle twigs, while the stench of decay and sweat wraps you in a suffocating fog, amplifying the injustice of a system that demands you push beyond human limits to prove your worth. A shocking sadness that settles in your chest as you realize the dummy's straw might conceal another corpse, a practice rooted in the grim reality of feudal Japan, where schools like the Katori Shinto-ryu used such methods to simulate battlefield chaos. Historians debating whether these drills were essential for survival or a cruel test of endurance, some citing records of apprentices collapsing from exhaustion, others arguing they forged warriors who could fight through any pain. Sarcasm creeps in, a wry thought likening this to a modern fitness boot camp where the coach yells no pain, no gain while you're swinging at nightmares instead of kettlebells, worse than any hit session gone wrong. And the irony twists as you realize this is no game. The dummy's resistance, a testament to the era's brutal calculus that valued skill over sanity. Zoom out, and the yard blurs into the vast dawn of feudal Japan, where countless dojos echoed with the thwack of wood on straw, the distant clang of forges crafting blades for endless wars, a poetic shift that widens your perspective to the relentless cycle of suffering that shaped the samurai's path. A fascinating tidbit surfaces: some schools weighted their dummies with stones to mimic the heft of armoured foes, an absurd innovation that made every strike a lesson in futility, like a medieval version of punching a brick wall. And the thought sparks a grim chuckle, a clever commentary on how even training was rigged to break you, not unlike today's corporate grind where burnout is a badge of honour. The master's presence looms, his gaze revisiting the yard from the moonlit ritual, now twisted with a surprising intensity as he adjusts the dummy's position with a sharp kick, revealing a flicker of exhaustion in his eyes that hints at his own nights spent drilling until collapse, a detail that paints him as a man scarred by the same crucible now testing you, turning the symbol of authority into a weary survivor of the system's demands. You strike again, the bokken connecting with a force that sends pain radiating through your shoulders, the sensory struggle deepening as the wet wool chafes relentlessly, the cold now a piercing ache that settles in your joints, while the stench thickens, the sour bite of sweat overpowering the decay, making every breath feel like inhaling ash. The torchlight flares briefly, illuminating the dummy's straw face, its crude features seeming to grimace under your blows, and the shocking sadness deepens as you imagine the hands that wove this straw, perhaps a peasant's, their labour erased to serve your endless drills, an injustice that fuels a quiet rage battling the exhaustion creeping in like the dawn's mist. Zoom out again, and the scene expands to encompass the broader tapestry of the era, where samurai trained under skies heavy with the promise of bloodshed, the wind carrying the faint cries of those who fell to ambition, shifting the tone from visceral pain to a contemplative sorrow for the lives ground down in this yard. Sarcasm strikes once more, a light jab likening this to a marathon coding session where you debug code until your eyes bleed, but here the bugs are your own limits, etched in sweat and straw. The master circles, his footsteps crunching on the gravel, his earlier weariness twisting into a quiet command to continue, his voice betraying a tremor that suggests he too once broke under these drills, a twist that deepens the bond of shared suffering, turning the yard into a crucible where both master and student are forged by the same fire. You swing again, the bokken striking with a force that jars your elbows, the pain now a white-hot blaze that blurs your vision, the wet wool dragging at your movements like a sodden chain, and as the dummy sways under your blows, its straw splitting to reveal a glimpse of pale flesh beneath. The injustice of this practice, using the dead to mimic the living hits like a physical blow, making your stomach churn. Historians argue over the toll of these exhaustive drills, some claiming they built warriors who could endure any hardship, others pointing to accounts of apprentices driven to despair, their bodies breaking before their spirits. But as you strike again, the debate fades into the immediate fire in your muscles, the iron tang intensifying into a bitter sludge that nauseates faintly, while the cold wraps you tighter, making each breath a labour. The torchlight dims, casting the yard in a hazy glow where shadows merge with the mist. A strange visual image of the dummy's straw face splitting open like a wound, its insides glinting with a sickly sheen that might be flesh or illusion, haunting your peripheral vision. The master pauses, his shadow stretching long across the ground, and in a hushed tone, he admits that his own drills left him vomiting from exhaustion, a revelation that deepens the bond of shared horror, turning the yard into a crucible where pain is the only teacher. The stench thickens, the sour sweat now a pervasive fog, and as you complete another strike, the silence grows heavier, a psychological chill settling in your core as you wonder if these drills will forge you into steel or shatter you into fragments. The dummy split straw staring back like a mirror of your fraying resolve. The yard lies still, the shadows coiling like serpents in the mist. A haunting image that lingers like a question unanswered. Will these endless blows sharpen your blade or dull your soul, pulling you deeper into a dawn where pain is the only constant, and the promise of mastery feels like a lie whispered by the wind. You sway on unsteady legs in the training yard, the dawn's grey light barely piercing the thick fog that wraps the air in a suffocating embrace. The stench of decay now laced with the acrid bite of your own exhaustion, the iron tang on your tongue mutating into a sour, metallic sludge that burns like bile, coating your mouth with the taste of dread, while the wet wool of your yukata, sodden with mud and sweat from endless drills, clings to your skin like a curse, chafing raw welts into your shoulders until they scream with every shuddering breath, a sensory struggle that makes each movement feel like clawing through a swamp of despair. The torchlight, flickering weakly on the stakes, casts grotesque shadows that twist across the churned ground, mutating from the straw dummy's jagged outlines into spectral forms that seem to pulse with an unnatural life, as if the yard itself is haunted by the spirits you've carved, their silent screams echoing in the fog's oppressive weight. A physical event erupts as you face an unseen opponent, not Kenji or a dummy, but a shadow born of fatigue, a vague figure conjured by your delirious mind that lunges from the mist with a bokken raised, forcing you to parry with a desperate swing that sends a jolt of white-hot pain through your wrists, the impact reverberating like a thunderclap in your bones, the cold seeping deeper into your joints until your fingers feel like brittle ice clutching the hilt. The shocking sadness crashes over you, the realization that this opponent might be your own fear, a projection of the countless bodies you've cut and comrades you've lost to betrayal, an injustice that gnaws at your soul like the fog eating at your skin, the era's brutal system turning you against yourself in a relentless quest for mastery. A factual moment of history slips into your thoughts, recalling how samurai schools like the Jikishinkage Ryu used exhaustion drills to push students into a trance-like state, believing it sharpened intuition. Historians debating whether these practices unlocked a warrior's inner strength or drove them to madness, some citing accounts of trainees seeing visions of fallen foes, others arguing it was a deliberate tactic to break the mind before rebuilding it. Sarcasm bubbles up. A wry thought comparing this to a modern all-nighter fueled by energy drinks and panic, except here you're fighting ghosts instead of deadlines. Worse than any VR horror game where the scares vanish with a headset's flick. Zoom out, and the yard dissolves into the vast dawn of feudal Japan, where countless dojos echoed with the ragged breaths of warriors pushed beyond their limits, the distant wail of a temple bell mingling with the wind's sigh through pines, a poetic shift that widens your perspective to the era's obsession with forging unbreakable souls through unbearable trials. A fascinating tidbit surfaces some schools blindfolded trainees during these drills to heighten their senses, an absurd practice that forced reliance on sound and instinct. Like a medieval version of sensory deprivation tanks, and the thought sparks a grim chuckle, a clever commentary on how even madness was weaponized, not unlike today's extreme mindfulness retreats that promise clarity through chaos. The master's presence looms, his gaze revisiting the yard from the betrayal's sting, now twisted with a surprising intensity as he steps closer, his voice a low growl admitting he once saw his own master's face in a similar fog, striking at shadows until collapse, a revelation that paints him as a man haunted by the same visions now testing you, turning the symbol of authority into a mirror of your own fracturing psyche. You swing again, the bokken cutting through the mist with a whoosh that meets nothing but air. The pain in your arms, a blazing inferno that blurs your vision, the wet wool chafing relentlessly as the cold numbs your fingers into clumsy stubs, while the stench of decay and sweat thickens, wrapping you in a fog of despair that makes every breath feel like inhaling ash. The torchlight flares briefly, illuminating a fleeting glimpse of the shadow's form, a faceless figure with eyes like voids, its outline blurring into the mist, and the shocking sadness deepens as you realize this fight is against your own doubts. The system's cruelty forcing you to battle the ghosts within, erasing the line between reality and illusion. Zoom out again, and the scene expands to encompass the broader tapestry of the era, where samurai trained under skies heavy with the promise of bloodshed, the distant clang of forges crafting blades for endless wars, shifting the tone from visceral dread to a contemplative sorrow for the minds broken in this yard. Sarcasm strikes once more, a light jab likening this to a bad acid trip without the neon colours, but here the hallucinations are forged in sweat and fear, not chemicals. The master circles, his footsteps muffled in the fog, his earlier confession twisting into a quiet command to continue, his voice betraying a tremor that suggests he, too, once faltered against such shadows, a twist that deepens the bond of shared horror, turning the yard into a crucible where both master and student are tested by the same spectral foes. You strike again, the bokken swinging wildly, the pain now a blinding blaze that makes your knees buckle, the wet wool dragging at your movements like a sodden chain, and as the shadow lunges, its form dissolving into mist. The injustice of this fight against a foe that might not exist hits like a physical blow, making your stomach churn. Historians argue over the psychological toll of these trance-like drills, some claiming they unlocked a warrior's sixth sense, others pointing to accounts of trainees driven to insanity, their minds shattered by endless shadows. But as you swing again, the debate fades into the immediate fire in your muscles, the iron tang intensifying into a bitter sludge that nauseates faintly, while the fog wraps you tighter, making each breath a labour. The torchlight dims, casting the yard in a hazy glow where shadows merge with the mist. A strange visual image of the faceless figure dissolving into countless others, their eyes glinting like stars in a void, haunting your peripheral vision. The master pauses, his shadow stretching long across the ground, and in a hushed tone, he admits that his own visions left him screaming into the night, a revelation that deepens the bond of shared terror, turning the yard into a crucible where fear is the only teacher. The stench thickens, the acrid bite of sweat now overpowering the decay. And as you complete another futile strike, the silence grows heavier, a psychological chill settling in your core as you wonder if these shadows will follow you into sleep, their eyeless gazes echoing in your dreams. The yard lies still, the fog coiling like a serpent around the stakes, a haunting image that lingers like a question unanswered. Will these spectral battles forge your instincts into steel, or drive you to the edge of madness, pulling you deeper into a dawn where the line between self and shadow blurs, and the promise of mastery feels like a lie whispered by the mist? You stand trembling in the heart of the training yard, the fog now a thick veil that chokes the dawn's faint light, the air heavy with the stench of decay and sweat, the iron tang on your tongue mutating into a rancid, metallic sludge that burns like poison, coating your mouth with the taste of your own unravelling, while the wet wool of your yukata, sodden with mud and days of relentless exertion, clings to your skin like a shroud of despair, chafing raw welts into your shoulders until they scream with every shuddering breath, a sensory struggle that makes each movement feel like clawing through a grave of your own making. The torchlight, barely flickering on the stakes, casts grotesque shadows that writhe across the churned ground, mutating from spectral forms into a chaotic swarm that seems to pulse with malevolent intent, as if the yard itself has turned against you, its earth soaked with the echoes of every cut you've made, living and dead. A physical event surges as you unleash a desperate fury, your bokken swinging in wild arcs against both straw dummies and the living forms of your fellow apprentices, their faces blurring into one as Kenji, now a recurring figure from the betrayal's sting, lunges with a bokken that grazes your thigh, the impact sending a white-hot blaze of pain through your leg, while another apprentice, a wiry boy named Taro, strikes at your shoulder, the dual assault overwhelming your senses, the ache in your limbs flaring into a fire that threatens to consume you. The yard a crucible where every blow tests the limits of your soul. The shocking sadness crashes over you. The realization that these boys, once your comrades over shared rice and laughter, are now enemies forged by the master's unrelenting demands. An injustice that tears at your heart like a blade. The system's cruelty turning you all into instruments of its will, erasing bonds in the name of mastery. A factual moment of history seeps into your thoughts, recalling how samurai schools like the Nitanichi Ryu push students to their breaking point in chaotic melees. Believing such trials mimicked the anarchy of battlefields, historians debating whether these drills forged unbreakable warriors or shattered minds under the weight of relentless pressure. Some citing accounts of apprentices collapsing into delirium, others arguing they birthed legends like Miyamoto Musashi, who thrived in such chaos. Sarcasm bubbles up, a wry thought comparing this to a modern mosh pit at a concert. Except here the crowd wants your blood, not just your sweat. Worse than any Black Friday stampede where the stakes are deals, not survival. Zoom out, and the yard dissolves into the vast dawn of feudal Japan, where countless dojos rang with the clash of wood and steel, the distant wail of war horns mingling with the wind's sigh through pines. A poetic shift that widens your perspective to the era's obsession with forging heroes through havoc, turning boys into blades at any cost. A fascinating tidbit surfaces: some schools used straw dummies laced with iron rods to simulate armoured foes, an absurd innovation that made every strike a lesson in pain, like a medieval version of hitting a punching bag filled with rocks, and the thought sparks a grim chuckle. A clever commentary on how even training was designed to break you. Not unlike today's extreme fitness challenges that glorify suffering for clout, the master's presence looms, his gaze revisiting the yard from the fog's spectral battles, now twisted with a surprising intensity as he shouts for you to keep striking, revealing a flicker of desperation in his voice that hints at his own peak of mastery when he faced a similar melee and nearly broke, a detail that paints him as a man forged by the same chaos now testing you, turning the symbol of authority into a mirror of your own teetering resolve. You swing again, the bokken connecting with Taro's arm, the impact sending pain radiating through your wrists, the wet wool chafing relentlessly as the cold numbs your fingers into clumsy stubs, while the stench of sweat and decay thickens, wrapping you in a fog of desperation that makes every breath feel like inhaling ash. The torchlight flares briefly, illuminating the chaos Kenji's grimace, Taro's snarl, the dummy's straw faces splitting open under your blows, and the shocking sadness deepens as you realize this melee isn't just a test, but a breaking point. The system forcing you to fight friends and phantoms alike, erasing the line between ally and enemy. Zoom out again, and the scene expands to encompass the broader tapestry of the era, where samurai trained under skies heavy with the promise of bloodshed, the distant clang of forgers crafting blades for endless wars, shifting the tone from visceral dread to a contemplative sorrow for the souls shattered in this yard. Sarcasm strikes once more, a light jab likening this to a reality TV brawl where everyone's a villain, but here the drama is etched in bruises and fear, not scripted tears. The master circles, his footsteps muffled in the fog, his earlier desperation twisting into a hoarse command to fight harder, his voice betraying a tremor that suggests he, too, once faltered in such chaos, a twist that deepens the bond of shared horror, turning the yard into a crucible where pain and betrayal forge the sharpest blades. You strike again, the bokken swinging wildly, the pain now a blinding inferno that makes your knees buckle, the wet wool dragging at your movements like a sodden chain, and as Kenji lunges, his bokken grazing your ribs with a sting that burns like betrayal. The injustice of this fight against friends turned foes, hits like a physical blow, making your stomach churn. Historians argue over the toll of these melees, some claiming they built warriors who could face any chaos, others pointing to accounts of apprentices driven to despair, their spirits broken by endless combat. But as you swing again, the debate fades into the immediate fire in your muscles, the iron tang intensifying into a bitter sludge that nauseates faintly, while the fog wraps you tighter, making each breath a labour. The torchlight dims, casting the yard in a hazy glow where shadows merge with the mist, a strange visual image of straw dummies and human faces blurring into one chaotic mass, their outlines flickering like ghosts of past battles. The master pauses, his shadow stretching long across the ground, and in a hushed tone, he admits that his own melee left him weeping in the dawn, a revelation that deepens the bond of shared terror, turning the yard into a crucible where fear is the only teacher. The stench thickens, the acrid bite of sweat now overpowering the decay, and as you complete another strike, the silence grows heavier, a psychological chill settling in your core as you wonder if this chaos will forge you into steel or shatter you into fragments. The dummy's split straw and Kenji's pained eyes staring back like a mirror of your fraying soul. The yard lies still, the fog coiling like a serpent around the stakes, a haunting image that lingers like a question unanswered. Will this desperate fury sharpen your blade or consume your humanity, pulling you deeper into a dawn where the line between victory and loss blurs, and the promise of mastery feels like a scream trapped in the mist? You slump against a wooden post in the training yard, the fog thinning as the dawn's pale light creeps through, casting a sickly glow over the churned earth still slick with mud and straw, the air heavy with the stench of decay now laced with the sour reek of your own exhaustion, the iron tang on your tongue mutating into a bitter, gritty sludge that burns like regret, coating your mouth with the taste of fractured bonds, while the wet wool of your yukata, sodden with days of sweat and grime, clings to your skin like a shroud of despair, chafing raw welts into your shoulders until they scream with every shuddering breath. A sensory struggle that makes each movement feel like dragging a broken body through a mire of lost trust. The torchlight, flickering weakly on the stakes, casts grotesque shadows that twist across the ground, mutating from the chaotic swarm of the melee into faint, elongated forms that seem to mourn the bonds you've shattered, as if the yard itself weeps for the camaraderie lost to the master's unrelenting crucible. A physical event unfolds as you try to rise, your legs trembling under the weight of exhaustion, the bokken slipping from your numb fingers to thud into the mud, the cold seeping deeper into your joints until they ache like rusted hinges, while Kenji, a recurring figure from the betrayal's sting, stands a few paces away, his own bokken lowered, his eyes hollow with the same exhaustion that mirrors yours, the silence between you heavier than any strike, a testament to the fractured bonds that once held you together over shared rice and fleeting laughter. The shocking sadness crashes over you, the realization that the system's cruelty has turned you both into strangers, the injustice of a world that demands you fight friends to prove your worth, tearing at your heart like a blade, leaving a wound deeper than any bruise from the melee. A factual moment of history seeps into your thoughts, recalling how samurai schools like the Kashima Shinto Ryu fostered intense rivalries to hone warriors for battle, a practice rooted in the Sengoku period's brutal survivalism. Historians debating whether these rivalries built loyalty to the school or sowed distrust that fractured dojos. Some citing records of apprentices abandoning their ruha after such betrayals, others arguing they forged warriors who could endure any loss. Sarcasm bubbles up, a wry thought comparing this to a modern reality show where alliances crumble for a shot at glory. Except here the prize is a nod from the master, not a cash payout, worse than any office politics where backstabbing stays metaphorical. Zoom out, and the yard blurs into the vast dawn of feudal Japan, where countless dojos echoed with the silence of broken bonds, the distant wail of a temple bell mingling with the wind's sigh through pines, a poetic shift that widens your perspective to the era's obsession with forging blades from broken spirits, turning comrades into rivals at any cost. A fascinating tidbit surfaces: some schools used ritual duels to settle disputes among students, an absurd practice where wooden swords were swapped for live blades to cleanse bad blood, like a medieval version of airing grievances with knives, and the thought sparks a grim chuckle, a clever commentary on how even conflict was formalized. Not unlike today's HR mediation sessions that mask deeper tensions, the master's presence looms, his gaze revisiting the yard from the melee's chaos, now twisted with a surprising weariness as he approaches Kenji, placing a hand on his shoulder in a rare gesture of comfort, revealing a flicker of regret that hints at his own lost bonds in this very yard. A detail that paints him as a man scarred by the same crucible now testing you, turning the symbol of authority into a mirror of your own fading resolve. You force yourself to stand, the pain in your legs a blazing inferno that threatens to buckle you again, the wet wool chafing relentlessly as the cold numbs your fingers into clumsy stubs, while the stench of sweat and decay thickens, wrapping you in a fog of despair that makes every breath feel like inhaling ash. The torchlight flares briefly, illuminating Kenji's slumped form, his eyes avoiding yours, and the shocking sadness deepens as you realize the system has stolen not just your strength, but your trust. The bonds you built over shared hardships now frayed like the straw dummies split open in the melee, zoom out again, and the scene expands to encompass the broader tapestry of the era where samurai trained under skies heavy with the promise of bloodshed, the distant clang of forges crafting blades for endless wars, shifting the tone from visceral pain to a contemplative sorrow for the friendships shattered in this yard. Sarcasm strikes once more, a light jab likening this to a toxic group chat where everyone unfriends each other over petty slights. But here the slights are etched in bruises and silence, not emojis and snark. The master circles, his footsteps muffled in the mud, his earlier regret twisting into a quiet command to pick up your bokken, his voice betraying a tremor that suggests he, too, once lost a friend to this crucible, a twist that deepens the bond of shared loss, turning the yard into a graveyard of trust where both master and student are haunted by the same ghosts. You retrieve the bokken, the cold wood biting into your palms, the pain now a dull roar that blurs your vision, the wet wool dragging at your movements like a sodden chain. And as you face Kenji, his hollow gaze meets yours for a fleeting moment, the injustice of this moment fighting to prove yourself, at the cost of friendship hitting like a physical blow, making your stomach churn. Historians argue over the toll of these rivalries, some claiming they built warriors who could face any loss, others pointing to accounts of apprentices driven to solitude, their spirits broken by fractured bonds. But as you grip the bokken, the debate fades into the immediate fire in your muscles, the iron tang intensifying into a bitter sludge that nauseates faintly, while the cold wraps you tighter, making each breath a labour. The torchlight dims, casting the yard in a hazy glow where shadows merge with the fog. A strange visual image of Kenji's silhouette blending with the straw dummies, their outlines flickering like ghosts of lost allies. The master pauses, his shadow stretching long across the ground, and in a hushed tone, he admits that his own bonds broke in this yard, leaving him to train alone for years, a revelation that deepens the bond of shared sorrow, turning the yard into a crucible where trust is burned away to forge solitary blades. The stench thickens, the sour bite of sweat now overpowering the decay, and as you raise the bokken, the silence grows heavier, a psychological chill settling in your core as you wonder if these fractured bonds will haunt you forever. The yard's shadows coiling like serpents in the mist, a haunting image that lingers like a question unanswered. Will this crucible forge you into steel or leave you broken, pulling you deeper into a dawn where the promise of mastery feels like a hollow echo, and the weight of lost trust buries you beneath the mud? You sit hunched in the dim corner of the training yard, the dawn's faint light barely piercing the lingering fog that wraps the air in a cold, damp shroud. The stench of decay now softened into a faint, sour musk. The iron tang on your tongue mutating into a dull, metallic ache that lingers like a bruise, coating your mouth with the taste of your own unravelling resolve, while the wet wool of your yukata, sodden with mud and days of sweat, clings to your skin like a heavy penance, chafing raw welts into your shoulders until they throb with every shallow breath. A sensory struggle that makes each shift of your body feel like peeling open an old wound. The torchlight, now reduced to embers on the stakes, casts faint, wavering shadows that flicker across the churned ground, mutating from the ghostly forms of lost bonds into soft, indistinct shapes that seem to whisper of introspection, as if the yard itself urges you to turn inward, its earth scarred by the weight of your trials. A physical event unfolds as you trace your fingers over the bruises and welts on your arms, each one a throbbing testament to the drills and betrayals endured, the pain sharp and immediate as you press a particularly tender spot on your forearm, a lingering wound from Kenji's bokken that pulses with a fire that mirrors the ache in your heart, the master's presence a recurring spectre now absent, his shadow replaced by the quiet weight of your own reflection. The shocking sadness swells. The realization that the system's cruelty has not only fractured your bonds with Kenji and Taro, but turned your blade inward, forcing you to confront the cost of your pursuit, an injustice that claws at your soul like the fog clawing at your skin, the era's relentless demand for mastery stripping away your humanity piece by piece. A factual moment of history seeps into your thoughts, recalling how samurai schools like the Tetsujin Ryu encourage solitary meditation after intense training, believing it forged a warrior's inner strength. Historians debating whether these introspective practices healed the psyche or deepened the scars of isolation. Some citing accounts of warriors finding clarity in silence, others arguing they bred a loneliness that haunted them into battle. Sarcasm bubbles up, a wry thought comparing this to a modern therapy session where you're told to find yourself while staring at a blank wall. Except here the wall is your own battered body, worse than any mindfulness app that promises peace without pain. Zoom out, and the yard blurs into the vast dawn of feudal Japan, where countless dojos fell silent as warriors turned inward, the distant chime of a temple bell mingling with the wind's sigh through pines, a poetic shift that widens your perspective to the era's obsession with balancing outer strength with inner resolve, turning boys into blades at the cost of their souls. A fascinating tidbit surfaces some schools used ink and brush as a meditative tool, having trainees write kanji for endurance on rice paper to focus their minds. An absurd practice that turned calligraphy into a mirror of pain, like a medieval version of journaling through trauma, and the thought sparks a grim chuckle, a clever commentary on how even reflection was weaponized, not unlike today's self-help books that monetize introspection. The master's absence feels heavier now, his earlier confessions of broken bonds twisting into a surprising void as you realize he may be meditating alone somewhere, grappling with the same scars you now trace, a detail that paints him as a man not just forged but fractured by this crucible, turning the symbol of authority into a mirror of your own quiet struggle. You press another bruise, the pain flaring like a spark in your chest, the wet wool chafing relentlessly as the cold settles deeper, numbing your fingers into clumsy stubs, while the faint musk of decay lingers, wrapping you in a fog of introspection that makes every breath feel like inhaling ash. The torchlight's embers glow faintly, illuminating a single straw fragment on the ground, its pale sheen catching the light like a fallen star. And the shocking sadness deepens as you realize this moment of solitude is the first time you've truly faced yourself, the system's cruelty forcing you to question whether mastery is worth the cost of your humanity. Zoom out again, and the scene expands to encompass the broader tapestry of the era, where samurai sat in silence under skies heavy with the promise of bloodshed, the distant rustle of leaves blending with the wind's lament, shifting the tone from visceral pain to a contemplative sorrow for the selves lost in this yard. Sarcasm strikes once more, a light jab likening this to a late-night doom scroll where you confront your flaws in the glow of a screen. But here the screen is your own skin, etched with bruises and doubt. The master's absence twists into a quiet challenge, his earlier vulnerability suggesting he, too, once sat alone in this yard, tracing his own wounds, a twist that deepens the bond of shared solitude, turning the yard into a crucible where both master and student are forged by the same inner battles. You shift your weight, the pain in your legs a dull roar that makes your vision blur, the wet wool dragging at your movements like a sodden chain, and as you trace another bruise, the injustice of this introspection facing your own brokenness to prove your worth hits like a physical blow, making your stomach churn. Historians argue over the effects of these meditative practices, some claiming they built warriors who could face any fear, others pointing to accounts of samurai driven to despair by their own reflections. But as you sit in silence, the debate fades into the immediate throb in your arms, the iron tang intensifying into a bitter ache that nauseates faintly. while the cold wraps you tighter, making each breath a labor. The torchlight's embers dim, casting the yard in a hazy glow where shadows merge with the fog. A strange visual image of the straw fragment glinting like a shard of your own resolve, haunting your peripheral vision. The master's absence grows heavier, and in your mind's eye you imagine him sitting in a distant grove, his own scars a map of battles fought within, a revelation that deepens the bond of shared sorrow, turning the yard into a crucible where pain is the only teacher. The faint musk thickens, the sour bite of sweat now a subtle undercurrent, and as you trace the final bruise, the silence grows heavier, a psychological chill settling in your core as you wonder if this introspection will forge you into steel or shatter you into fragments. The yard's shadows coiling like serpents in the fog, a haunting image that lingers like a question unanswered. Will this inward turn sharpen your soul or bury it beneath the weight of your own scars, pulling you deeper into a dawn where the promise of mastery feels like a whisper of redemption, faint and fleeting in the cold, unforgiving light? You rise slowly from the muddied training yard, the dawn's pale light now breaking through the thinning fog, casting a fragile glow over the churned earth still scarred from your endless trials. The air carrying a faint sour musk of decay, now softened by the crisp bite of morning dew. The iron tang on your tongue mutating into a subtle, metallic whisper that lingers like a fading echo of your struggles, while the wet wool of your yukata, sodden with days of sweat and grime, clings to your skin with a weary weight, chafing raw welts into your shoulders that throb with a dull ache, a sensory struggle that makes each step feel like emerging from a crucible forged of pain and resolve. The torchlight's embers, barely smouldering on the stakes, cast faint shadows that flicker across the ground, mutating from the ghostly forms of introspection into soft, wavering shapes that seem to cradle your battered form, as if the yard itself acknowledges the hardened will you've carved from its trials. A physical event unfolds as you take a tentative step forward, your legs trembling but steady, the bokken still clutched in your hand, its wood worn smooth by countless strikes, and you face the empty yard where Kenji and Taro once stood, their absence a recurring weight from the fractured bonds, now replaced by a quiet determination as you swing the bokken in a slow, deliberate arc, the motion sending a muted pain through your arms, no longer a fire but a smouldering ember that signals your emergence from the crucible. The shocking sadness lingers, the realization that the system's cruelty has left you solitary but stronger, an injustice that aches like a bruise on your soul, yet fuels a resolve to carry the scars with pride, the era's brutal forge having shaped you into something unyielding, even as it stripped away your trust. A factual moment of history seeps into your thoughts, recalling how samurai schools like the Yagyu Shinkajiryu marked the end of training cycles with solitary kata, performed to symbolize a warrior's readiness for battle. Historians debating whether these rituals signified mastery or merely survival, some citing accounts of samurai emerging as peerless swordsmen, others arguing they were broken men cloaking their scars in discipline. Sarcasm bubbles up. A wry thought comparing this to a modern graduation ceremony where you get a diploma for surviving. Except here your diploma is a battered body and a blade, worse than any cap and gown photo op with fake smiles. Zoom out, and the yard blurs into the vast dawn of feudal Japan, where countless dojos stood silent as warriors stepped into their destinies. The distant rustle of bamboo mingling with the wind's sigh through pines, a poetic shift that widens your perspective to the era's obsession with forging blades from broken spirits, turning solitude into strength. A fascinating tidbit surfaces some schools gifted surviving apprentices a single iron nail to symbolize their hardened will, an absurd token meant to anchor their resolve, like a medieval version of a participation trophy. And the thought sparks a grim chuckle, a clever commentary on how even honor was distilled into something as mundane as metal. Not unlike today's corporate badges for Employee of the Month, the master's absence feels lighter now, his earlier confessions of broken bonds twisting into a surprising silence that suggests he's watching from a distance, perhaps recognizing your emergence, a detail that paints him as a man who once stepped from this same crucible, turning the symbol of authority into a distant guide whose own scars mirror yours. You swing the bokken again, the motion smoother now, The pain in your arms, a quiet pulse that blends with the morning's chill. The wet wool chafing less as you move with purpose, while the faint musk of decay fades, replaced by the clean scent of dew, wrapping you in a fragile calm that makes each breath feel like a step toward redemption. The torchlight's embers glow faintly, illuminating a single blade of grass pushing through the mud, its green tip catching the light like a spark of defiance. And the shocking sadness softens as you realize this yard, once a graveyard of trust, has forged you into something new, a warrior who carries the injustice of the system as a badge of ironic pride. Zoom out again, and the scene expands to encompass the broader tapestry of the era, where samurai stepped from dojos into battlefields under skies heavy with the promise of bloodshed, the distant chime of a temple bell blending with the wind's lament, shifting the tone from visceral pain to a contemplative peace for the strength won through suffering. Sarcasm strikes once more, a light jab likening this to a social media post bragging about surviving a tough week. But here the post is written in scars and silence, not hashtags and likes. The master's absence twists into a quiet acknowledgement, his earlier vulnerability suggesting he, too, once stood in this yard, swinging a bokken to prove his worth, a twist that deepens the bond of shared triumph, turning the yard into a crucible where both master and student are forged by the same trials. You step forward, the bokken steady in your hand, the pain now a faint echo that grounds you, the wet wool a familiar weight that no longer drags, and as you face the empty yard, the injustice of your journey fighting friends, carving the dead settles into a quiet resolve, a testament to your survival. Historians argue over the legacy of these solitary rituals, some claiming they birthed warriors who could face any foe, others pointing to accounts of samurai haunted by their scars. But as you swing again, the debate fades into the immediate pulse in your muscles, the iron tang softening into a faint whisper that no longer nauseates, while the morning's chill wraps you gently, making each breath a labour of pride. The torchlight's embers dim, casting the yard in a soft glow where shadows merge with the dawn, a strange visual image of the grass blade standing tall amid the mud, its defiance mirroring your own. The master's absence grows lighter, and in your mind's eye you imagine him nodding from a distant grove, his own scars a map of trials overcome, a revelation that deepens the bond of shared victory, turning the yard into a crucible where pain has forged resilience. The faint musk dissipates, the clean dew now a subtle undercurrent, and as you complete another swing, the silence grows lighter, a psychological chill giving way to a quiet warmth, as you realize you've emerged not just as a warrior, but as a survivor, the yard's shadows fading like ghosts released from their chains, a haunting image that lingers like a question answered. Will this crucible define you by its pain or its promise, pulling you deeper into a dawn where the weight of your scars becomes the strength of your soul, and the promise of mastery feels like a whisper of triumph? Faint, but undeniable in the morning's fragile light, you stand alone in the training yard, the dawn's soft light now weaving through the last wisps of fog, bathing the churned earth in a gentle glow that softens the scars of your trials, the air carrying a faint, clean scent of dew that washes away the lingering musk of decay, the iron tang on your tongue mutating into a faint metallic whisper that fades like a distant memory, while the wet wool of your yukata, still sodden with sweat and grime, clings lightly to your skin, its chafed welts now a quiet throb, a sensory struggle transformed into a badge of endurance that grounds you with every steady breath. The torchlight's embers, long extinguished, leave no shadows, the ground bathed in natural light that reveals the straw and mud as silent witnesses to your journey, their stillness a testament to the scars you've etched into your soul, each one a story of survival. A physical event unfolds as you lift the bokken one final time, its wood worn smooth by countless strikes, and perform a slow, deliberate kata, the motion flowing like water over stone. The pain in your arms now a faint pulse that harmonizes with the morning's calm, the yard empty of Kenji, Taro, or the master. Their absence a recurring weight now lifted, replaced by a quiet pride that fills the space where betrayal once stood. The shocking sadness softens, the realization that the system's cruelty, its corpses, its rivalries, its endless drills has forged you into something unyielding, an injustice you've transcended by carrying your scars with honor. The era's brutal forge no longer a chain but a foundation for your strength. A factual moment of history seeps into your thoughts, recalling how samurai schools like the Kashima Shinto-ryu marked the end of training with a solitary vow, a ritual to seal a warrior's legacy. Historians debating whether these vows bound samurai to their schools or set them free to carve their own paths, some citing accounts of warriors who wandered as ronin, others arguing they served lords with unwavering loyalty. Sarcasm bubbles up. A wry thought comparing this to a modern LinkedIn post boasting about surviving a tough job. Except here your resume is written in bruises and resolve. Better than any corporate badge for grit. Zoom out, and the yard blurs into the vast dawn of feudal Japan, where countless samurai stood alone after their trials. The distant rustle of bamboo blending with the wind's soft sigh through pines. A poetic shift that widens your perspective to the era's obsession with forging legacies from pain, turning solitude into a silent triumph. A fascinating tidbit surfaces: some schools etched a single kanji for will onto a trainee's bokken as a final gift. An absurd token meant to anchor their resolve, like a medieval version of a motivational quote, tattoo, and the thought sparks a quiet smile. A clever commentary on how even honor was distilled into symbols, not unlike today's inspirational memes that promise strength through struggle. The master's absence feels complete now, his earlier confessions of broken bonds and haunted nights twisting into a final silence that suggests he, too, once stood here. His own scars a map of triumphs won, a detail that paints him as a man who emerged from this crucible, turning the symbol of authority into a distant echo of your own victory. You complete the kata, the bokken steady in your hands, the pain now a gentle hum that grounds you, the wet wool a familiar weight that no longer drags, while the clean scent of dew wraps you in a fragile calm, making each breath a testament to your survival. The dawn's light brightens, illuminating a single blade of grass pushing through the mud, its green tip glinting like a spark of defiance, and the shocking sadness fades into pride as you realize this yard, once a graveyard of trust, has forged you into a warrior who carries injustice as a badge of resilience. Zoom out again, and the scene expands to encompass the broader tapestry of the era, where samurai stepped from dojos into destinies under skies heavy with promise. The distant chime of a temple bell blending with the wind's lament, shifting the tone from visceral struggle to a contemplative peace for the legacy won through suffering. Sarcasm strikes one last time, a light jab likening this to a viral TikTok about overcoming odds. But here the triumph is etched in scars and silence, not filters and likes. The master's absence twists into a quiet blessing, his earlier vulnerability suggesting he, too, once performed this kata, his own resolve a mirror of yours, a twist that deepens the bond of shared triumph, turning the yard into a crucible where pain has forged resilience. You lower the bokken, the pain now a faint echo, the dew's scent a subtle undercurrent, and as you stand tall, the silence grows lighter, a psychological warmth settling in your core as you realize you've emerged not just as a warrior but as a survivor. The yard's scars fading like ghosts released from their chains. A haunting image that lingers like a question, answered your legacy is not in the bodies you've cut or the bonds you've lost, but in the silent scars you carry, a testament to a soul forged in the crucible of dawn's unrelenting light. You stand motionless in the training yard, the dawn's gentle light now softening into a golden haze, the air quiet and cool, carrying only the faint whisper of dew-kissed grass, the iron tang on your tongue fading into a soft, clean breath that feels like release, while the wet wool of your yukata, heavy with the trials of days past, rests lightly on your shoulders, its chafed welts now a tender memory of endurance, each throb a gentle reminder of the strength you've carved from pain. The yard lies still, its churned earth settling into silence, the straw and mud blending into a tapestry of scars that mirror your own, their edges softened by the morning's embrace. You lower the bokken slowly, its wood warm in your hands, and let your gaze drift to the horizon, where the pines sway gently, their rustle a soothing lullaby that carries away the echoes of betrayal and decay. The distant chime of a temple bell fades into a faint hum, blending with the wind's soft sigh, and the world feels vast yet intimate, a quiet cradle for your weary soul. You breathe deeply, The air no longer heavy with musk but light with promise. Each inhale a step toward peace, each exhale a release of the crucible's weight. The dawn's glow wraps you like a blanket, its warmth easing the ache in your bones, and as you close your eyes, the yard fades, the shadows dissolve, the scars soften into whispers of triumph. You're no longer bound by the yard's trials, no longer haunted by its ghosts. The silence grows deeper, the light gentler, the world quieter, until all that remains is your steady breath, a whisper of resilience that carries you into sleep's embrace.